this is a follow-up video to the one I uploaded 2 days ago. And before you watch this video, I do recommend strongly that you watch my previous video, Analysed COVID-19, the history, spread, and how to fight it. And the reason I say that is because it's basically 55 minutes of very good information about this virus. It goes through the history of the virus, how it spread, and more importantly, it also goes through the symptoms, so you know what to look for if you're suspecting that you might have it. It also goes through how the virus actually spreads, so you know how to avoid getting it, but also if you have it, you know how to avoid infecting others. And it also debunks a lot of common myths around this virus that are being spread right now. So I do say this, and I mean it. Please watch that video before you watch this one. It might just save your life. You know, I'm not kidding. It might save your life or the lives of people around you. I put a lot of effort into that video, and it's very educational. It is, without a doubt, the best video I've done so far this year. But I also think it's one of my best videos on this channel ever, if I'm going to be honest. And yeah, it's very educational. Please watch it. And anyway, let's go on with this video, assuming that you've come back from watching the previous one. And in this video, this video was supposed to be included in the previous video, but I thought that, you know, it's already 55 minutes long, so I might as well just make this a separate video and go into more detail instead, explaining why it is that some nations, you know, have such different death rates compared to other nations. And if we look, for instance, at the U.S. Now, the U.S. now has more confirmed cases than any other nation, okay? And it's happened fast. It's happened very fast. So if we look at the curve here of the confirmed cases, if we look at just, you know, as recently as 19th of March, so 10 days ago, keep in mind, this is just a little bit more than a week. So just 10 days ago, the US had 13.7 thousand cases, so almost 14,000. That has increased over 9 times, almost 10 times at this point. Think about that. That is how quickly the cases rise across the world right now. And if we look at the death rate here, since most of these cases who are confirmed, they haven't been, you know, far enough yet in the actual development of the illness to recover, you know, all of them. So the best thing we can do right now is to just take the total amount of deaths and divide that with the total confirmed cases. Okay, so that's the best thing we can do right now. Until, you know, another month when we have more clear data of the amount of people who are recovered, okay? So keep in mind, this is not a final estimate of how many is going to die from this, but it's just a death rate based on the data that's available right now, and it is very much subject to change. But if we calculate this now, so here's the US. We take 2,192 deaths divided by 124,686 cases. Okay, so the death rate in the US right now is about, yeah, let's round it up, about 2%, let's say. Okay, now that's not too bad, okay? I mean, it's definitely not good, but it's around, you know, the international average. According to the World Health Organization, as well as the CDC, the international death rate seems to be around 2% in totals, somewhere along those lines. And it's actually gone up a little bit, because in the beginning, the World Health Organization and the CDC said that the international death rate seems to be around, 1% or so. But it's gone up now. So the US is somewhere around the international death rate. So the US is not doing too poorly yet. And this is important to stress. I have to say, like, the people in the US, the nurses, they're doing an amazing job so far. It's just incredible what they're able to do with their healthcare system, which, let's be honest, is not the best. When you look at the nations in the West, the US tends to be among the nations that score the lowest, even though it's supposed to be one of the richest nations in the world. And, that's a different topic for a different video, of course, but, it is quite amazing how well they're able so far to deal with this. But you got to keep in mind here, the US has not even peaked yet. Like, this is not even the peak. Like, the peak is still at least, according to the CDC, the peak is at least 2 weeks away. At least. So it's not until in 2 weeks we can actually start to say something more concrete about this. But if we look at the curve here, I mean, it's still rising. And it's rising fast, And we can determine that it's still rising fast because of the length of the line between these dots. And you notice how in the beginning here, you can't even see the line between the dots, right? But since the lines get longer between these dots, that means that the increase is increasing exponentially, okay? And, people might wonder here, how exactly do you know if, the cases are still growing exponentially or not? And the way you can know this mathematically is if the increase, okay, so if you take the ratio between 2 points here, okay, if the increase, when you calculate the ratio, if it's above 1, you know it's still increasing exponentially. If it's below 1, then you know it's starting to decrease, okay? And that's how, for instance, in China, which is what we're going to look at, later. That's how we know that in China, they've already hit the peak. And considering the population of China, they actually have surprisingly few deaths and surprisingly few cases. China has been very good at containing this. Sadly, they didn't contain it sooner, and it wouldn't have gotten outside of China, but it did. But if we look at the US here, we can look at the hotspots. So if we look at New York here, New York is the worst hit. So we look at here, New York, 53,520 confirmed cases in New York. Now, that is insane. Okay, that is insane. Now, you have, a lot of cases, of course, in the rest of the US, but the point is, New York alone accounts for almost half of all the confirmed cases in the US. So New York is definitely an area that the federal government has to spend resources on, but especially New York City. And, it kind of makes sense because New York City is an international metropolis, okay? You have a lot of airline traffic going through New York, and this thing spreads through airlines. And, of course, all the people, who land in New York and whatever, and it doesn't even have to be people who are going to stay in New York. Let's say that you're on a flight, and your plane just lands in New York, and you've got a few hours to walk around in the airport. And this is at the beginning of the outbreak, and we don't know yet, but it's come to the US. You walk around the airport and you touch everything, and airports are not sanitary at all. I mean, in fact, airplanes are not sanitary. Like, you would freak out if you knew the kind of germs you will find on an airplane. And New York also has, a very popular public transport system. And I don't know if you've ever been to a New York subway station or a subway train, but those places are nasty. They are. I mean, no offense to the public transport system in New York. It's great. Okay, it covers everything. If you live in New York City, you don't need a car. It's that simple. You don't need a car, ever. You can just take the fucking subway to everywhere. So that's great, but it's not clean. Stay away from the subway right now, or you're gonna catch this thing. That's a guarantee. But yeah, so if we look at New York, New York is very densely populated. I mean, of course, people in Asia would laugh at me saying that because Tokyo, for instance, is ridiculously densely populated. But New York is still, by American standards, or Western standards in general, New York is very densely populated. And that's a problem here, because it means that, people are forced to be cramped up against each other like this. And until the quarantine was put in place, people just moved around freely and spread this thing around. But yeah, I'm surprised that the death rate in New York isn't higher, because let me show you something. So here's the thing. Even the wealthy hospitals in New York right now are under a lot of stress. They are underfunded, understaffed, and we don't even get the right equipment from the federal government right now. This should be priority one to President Trump. This should be priority number one. But a worker at New York City Hospital, where nurses wear trash bags as protection, dies from coronavirus. So the thing is, this is how bad it is. Now, I don't know if you've seen videos of, from China or Japan or the other Asian nations, or even some European nations, where they are, receiving these patients at hospitals. But one thing you may notice is they're wearing hazmat suits, okay? They're wearing hazmat suits. Because this thing is very contagious. Very contagious. Now, you might be wondering, well, if it's that contagious, why are the authorities telling me as a citizen that, all I need to do to avoid getting infected is to, just, stand, 3 feet or 1 meter away from people who are talking to me or whatever, so I don't get the fucking droplets on me with the virus? Or, why am I told to simply just wash my hands and I'm going to be fine, most likely? The reason is because it is presumed that you as a civilian are already going to stay inside for the most part, and you're only going to go outside when you actually need to. So that's why that works for you as a civilian. That's why if you simply follow those advice, you will probably be okay, at least for a couple of months. And that's not true, though, for people in this profession. People who work at hospitals right now, they need to be close to people to treat them, okay? They need to be able to touch a bunch of things at the same time in order to do their job. So they need, actual hazmat suits, or anything close to that, at least. Now, as good of a protection as this would give you, it's not enough, and it's frankly a shame, isn't it? Like if I was in America right now, which I'm not. I currently reside in Europe, but if I was in America right now, I would just shake my head. Okay, I would just shake my head. This is embarrassing. Other nations, they at least have an excuse. Okay, there's a shortage of whatever, but they're going to get on top of it. Like in many European nations where they didn't have these kinds of protective suits that we need to work with this stuff, they're getting it now. Their government actually spends the money to get people this, because they realize, oh shit, We need to actually take care of the people in our healthcare system. This is how nurses, as well as doctors, mind you, are treated in the U.S. These hospitals don't even get, proper protective gear to give to their personnel. This is ridiculous. Again, that's a topic for another video. But so do you see my point now? It's a wonder that the death rate isn't higher in New York, for instance, because it's just pathetic. I'm gonna be honest. It's just pathetic. But anyway, so the death rate. Considering the strain that New York hospitals are under already, they're doing a pretty good job. So let's calculate the death rate here. So 834 divided by 53,520. So yeah, that's about 1.5% death rate. So New York is actually doing a little better right now. A little better than the U.S. as a whole. So I say bravo, just all the praise to the healthcare workers in New York. You guys, despite the circumstances, are doing just an amazing job. You are. It's quite staggering. I don't know how you do it. But that's going to change. Because New York hospitals, if they are this... if they are in this bad shape when you're this far away from the peak, it's going to get bad. In another 2 weeks, that death rate is going to jump. That's what I think. We're talking at least 10 times the amount of deaths, and the death rate is no longer going to be 1.5%. It's going to be like 10.5%. It might even go higher than that because, there's a limit. There's a limit to how far you can push a healthcare system, especially a healthcare system which is already very unequal, as in the U.S. But that's the U.S. And the reason that the U.S. Doesn't have a higher death rate right now is because you actually are allowed in the U.S. to get emergency treatment. Okay, so that's something that a lot of people don't know. It's intensive care, okay, and it's the long-term care. That's really what costs money. That's what you need insurance for. However, as an American citizen, you are actually entitled to emergency care. All right, so if you come in and you show the symptoms, you will get the emergency care taken care of you. Okay, you will be taken care of. However, it's when you're moved into intensive care, that's when the clock starts ticking, and that's when you have to pay thousands and thousands of dollars. However, since the intensive care costs so much, and the insurance companies are not willing to pay, in many cases, they find loopholes to wiggle out and pay as little as possible for treatment. This death rate is going to increase as well for another reason, and that is the fact that a lot of people are going to wait longer than necessary to get treatment. Just because they know that, oh shit, I may actually end up getting bankrupt if I go in. But no, the US is actually doing surprisingly well so far, but it's going to change. It is going to change, and it's not just me saying this. The CDC themselves are saying this. It's only a matter of time before the death rate is going to rise very quickly in the US, because the healthcare system in the US is already on its knees. Nurses are wearing trash bags, for crying out loud. That's not a good healthcare system. It's going to crash soon. And when it does, that number is going to, multiply 10 times at least. And you may actually have a scenario where it's going to be very much like the Spanish flu in the US, which, by the way, it originated in Kansas, it's believed. So the only reason it's called the Spanish flu is because Spain was the only nation, I believe, during the outbreak that actually reported, the true figures of the amount of dead people. And the other nations didn't because of political reasons, which is really dumb. But yeah, that's the U.S. The death rate so far, not too bad, but it's definitely gonna increase. Now we get to Italy. Italy is doing very poorly. Just look at that death rate, okay? You almost have as many deaths as total recovered so far. That is bad. And if we calculate the death rate, 10,023 divided by 92,472. So yeah, you have almost 11% of a death rate. That's bad. That's really bad. And now you might be wondering, well, Italy actually has, you know, I mean, especially compared to the U.S., the Italian healthcare system is miles ahead. It's far better. So Italy has an okay healthcare service, and more importantly, it's a universal healthcare service. So, you know, it's very equal in its, you know, treatment of people. And people also don't feel, you know, the fear of wondering, okay, how am I supposed to pay for this treatment? So when people start to get bad, they actually do come in, which is good. So you might be thinking, okay, so the death rate in Italy should be lower than in the US. Well, here's the problem. Even though Italy has an okay healthcare system, I mean, compared to the US, it's way better. And even though, you know, people do come in when they are getting very ill, instead of, you know, waiting until the very last moment where they can't wait anymore. The problem is you have two factors in Italy. One, Italy has the second highest elderly population. So when you look at the demographics of Italy, they have the second highest population of people over the age of 65. Which, you know, normally is not a bad thing. It's actually a very good sign. It means that they're doing something right. I mean, old people live for a long time in Italy. That's good. That's good. But in this case, it's kind of bad because we know that if you're 80 or older, you have a 1 in 6 chance of dying from this thing. And since Italy has a bunch of old people, yeah, they're going to drop like flies. There's no way. There's no nice way of saying it. They're just gonna drop like flies. It's sad, but it's the reality. And then there's the second factor here. Italy also has, you know, in many of their towns, they have a dense population. I don't know if you've seen the living quarters of Rome, for instance, but you know, it looks very cozy. It looks very aesthetically pleasing. It's definitely the kind of place where, you know, if you are going to live in an apartment in Italy, that's sort of where you want to live because it looks very, very nice, you know, it does. But from a pandemic viewpoint, it's very bad. And the problem is a lot of the elderly actually live with, you know, the younger members of their family. So it's not unusual in Italy that the elderly don't live in a home, but rather live, you know, with the younger members of their family. So the younger members of their family take care of the elderly for a longer time period than many other nations. Because, you know, in the US, once you reach the age of 70, and let's say that you have, you know, rheumatism or you start to go a little bit senile, it's not unusual that you go very quickly to a home, you know, and you're taking care of their children are not expected to take care of their parents. But in Italy, the culture is a bit different. You know, putting someone in a home is the last resort. The family will usually try and take care of the elderly of their family for a longer time period. So this means that a lot of young people who, when they do get infected with this virus, often they show very mild symptoms or they don't show any symptoms at all. And this leads to them unknowingly spreading this illness to their elderly family members. And so you have this perfect storm here between these two factors: a very high elderly population, the second highest in Europe, and a culture where, the young and the old, socially mix a lot, which, again, is not a bad thing normally. That's actually a very beautiful thing. And but that's one of the things I like about these Mediterranean cultures. You have very good family values in that sense. And socially, that's a huge plus, and economically, that might actually be a huge plus as well, because the government doesn't have to spend as much money on taking care of the elderly if the family members do. So look, there's plenty of positives of having a system like that. However, from a pandemic viewpoint, it's bad. Okay, it's really bad. And actually, you do have a third factor here as well, and it's the fact that Italy is one of the most popular nations for tourists to visit. And actually, a lot of tourists from Asia, a lot of Chinese tourists go to Italy. It's just, it is what it is. And naturally, because this thing had its first outbreak in China, and since Chinese people like to go to Italy, it makes sense that, Italy would have this problem that it's having right now. And the worst part is Italy is still not peaking. Okay, now their rise is not as dramatic as it is in the U.S., of course, not by a long shot. So they seem to the social distancing that the government is doing here in Italy seems to be working so far in the terms of preventing this thing from increasing exponentially, because it doesn't look like an exponential increase. It looks more like a linear increase, which is good. It's not good enough, but at least it's better than what you're seeing in the U.S. And if this continues, I think that Italy is going to flatten their curve faster than the U.S. will. But still, you are going to see a lot more dead people in Italy. And it's because of the factors I just mentioned, a high elderly population, and the elderly have good social contact with the youth that often carry this thing unknowingly. And also a lot of tourists from Asia, especially China, that visit Italy. So those three factors are definitely wreaking havoc right now. So let's look at China. In China, the death rate is pretty good. So let's do the math here. 3,304 divided by 82,061 cases. So the death rate, if you look at the total confirmed cases here, it's about 4%. And considering that this is China, and just how densely populated China is, and also, let's be honest, the Chinese, a lot of them don't have the best eating habits. I'm just saying, this virus is thought to originate from a wet market in China. And for those of you who don't know, a wet market is basically a market where you have both dead and alive animals. And a lot of these animals are slaughtered on site. And this is a problem because it makes it harder for the authorities in China to enforce, hygienic standards. And, they didn't serve bats at this market in the Hubei province, where this is thought to originate, or where the outbreak was at least first. But it's believed that bats infected chickens, for instance, and chickens were sold at this market. And had it not been a wet market, but rather a market where the animals had already been slaughtered in facilities where the government could enforce very strict hygiene standards, it's believed that the outbreak would not be as bad, not nearly. But yeah, China is actually doing, considering, I mean, they were the nation that was first hit by this thing. And so they were taken by surprise. And you're always at a disadvantage then. But considering the circumstances, China is doing very well, like surprisingly well. And they do deserve a round of applause, considering how well they've handled this. And it's because as soon as this thing became, an actual problem, they shut it down. Everything was shut down. They put everyone in quarantine. And it's not until now, over a month later, that they're, actually starting to ease the quarantine a little bit. And if you look at their curve, it's pretty much flattened. If you look at the logarithmic, yeah, it's pretty much flat. Daily increase, yeah, you see hardly any new increases. We're talking like, let's see. Yeah, we're talking like in the hundreds. And when it was at its worst, you had like in a day 15,000 new cases, and we've gone from that now to barely over 100. So China is doing very well. They have it under control, and every nation should emulate what they did. And keep in mind, they were the first hit. They were taken by surprise. Any nation is at a disadvantage when they're taken by surprise like this, because they don't have other nations to go by. And they still managed to deal with it as well as they did. So let's see. But China is very densely populated. They don't have the best and most hygienic eating standards. And that's definitely going to have to change. There's going to be pressure from the rest of the world now on China. I guarantee you that they're going to have to shut down these markets, because it just can't go on like this. You have so many viruses that originate from, especially China. SARS, for instance. It's bad. Germany is doing very well, all things considered. Let's calculate this. 433 divided by 57,695. So, Italy, they're not even at 1%. If we're going to round off, about 1%, let's say. So Germany is doing very well. They're doing very well. And it's because when they started doing their social distancing, which eventually became a quarantine, all their citizens listened. Okay, there was no fuss. Everyone just did what they were told. And this culture of compliance to authority in Germany, it's a double-edged sword. There's good aspects of it, there's bad aspects of it, but in this particular case, it's good. Germany, well done. But as you can see, the curve is still increasing. But it seems like maybe, just maybe, the quarantine is starting to show effects. We'll have to wait and see. But it seems like the quarantine is starting to really pay off, and hopefully, if things continue, they're going to flatten soon. And the reason they have such a low death rate is, obviously because they have a fairly good healthcare system. It's far more egalitarian than in the U.S. And also a large portion of their elderly, they live in homes where they are, more secluded from younger people. And also Germans are not quite as social as a lot of people around the Mediterranean are. So they're more secluded naturally. And all of this plays a role, of course. And also right now in Germany, you really don't have that many tourists, because the climate is just not that favorable right now. A lot of people visit Spain and Italy, even in winter, just because the climate is mild, And people who don't want to get heat stroke when on holiday, they prefer to go to Spain and Italy during winter, actually. So, yeah, not a lot of tourists right now in Germany. That's one factor. The elderly are actually secluded. That's another factor. And I also don't think they have as high of an elderly population as Spain and Italy. I'm not sure about that, though, but that could be another explanation. But yeah, all of these things add up, as you can tell. We're going to skip France because, yeah, I've already gone through this. Iran, let's look at their rate, 2,517 divided by 35,408. Yeah, they're not doing well. Again, they have almost twice the rate as China, and they have about 7% death rate. Now, why that is, a multitude of reasons. They were one of the nations that were first hit, basically. They were one of the nations that were first infected with the virus outside of China. That's one factor. And also their healthcare system, I'm guessing, is just not that good, to be honest. They also don't tend to be that good with hygiene. And there's this video that I saw of, I believe it's an imam going around and basically doing some kind of religious ceremony with people who have the coronavirus, and he doesn't have any protective gear whatsoever. None whatsoever. It's not flattening anytime soon. United Kingdom, total confirmed cases 17,315, increasing very quickly. I mean, looking at the logarithmic scale here for UK, it's very bad. Just 3 days ago, it was 9,500 people who were infected. Now, 2 days later, it's 17.3 thousand cases. It's almost doubled in just 2 days. So right now, the exponential rate of this thing is, that this thing is spreading by, it's actually higher than the international rate by far. So UK is actually doing worse than a lot of nations, and it's gonna get bad. So let's calculate the death rate. 1,021 divided by 17,315. Yeah, almost 6%. Almost 6% mortality so far, which is definitely not good. It's worse than China, not quite as bad as Iran or Spain, and definitely not as bad as Italy. But just you wait. Just you wait. It's gonna get worse, definitely. The government at first didn't take this seriously. There's this famous quote by the health minister, I believe, where he or she said that, we want people to get this thing. We want at least 60% of people to be infected so we have herd immunity. Which is just dumb. It's just really dumb, because we're not talking about the common cold here. We're not talking about the flu. We're talking about a deadly virus. Okay? This thing is dangerous, and it's very contagious. It's about 10 to 30 times worse than the flu, according to the CDC. If any government needs to take this seriously, otherwise you're going to have a bunch of dead people on your hands. And the UK is not doing well. Now, thankfully, on the 23rd of March, so almost a week ago, they went into a full lockdown, a full quarantine, which is good. And the problem is, though, you can carry this virus for, a week, maybe 2 weeks even, and not show any real symptoms. And then all of a sudden you fall ill, which means that we're not going to see the the impact of the full quarantine for a while, sadly. And yeah, just looking at the daily increases, yeah, it's not going to flatten anytime soon. Sadly, it's only going to keep increasing. So let's go down here to other nations. Now let's go to Brazil. So in Brazil, you right now have 114 dead divided by 3,904. So yeah, they have a death rate of about 3%. So a little bit higher than the international death rate right now, according to the CDC, which was estimated at first. That is, it's gone up now, but it was estimated at first. So I mean, they're not doing as badly as you might expect, but then again, this is just the tip of the iceberg. You know, Brazil, a lot of parts of Brazil are not that densely populated. I mean, if you live in the middle of the rainforest, you're probably not going to catch this thing. But that being said, in the favelas of Rio de Janeiro, you probably have a huge number of people who are, you know, outside of the statistics, to be honest. And I actually read this news story. It's quite amazing, actually. The gangs. Okay, so the gangs of Rio de Janeiro are enforcing a curfew or a quarantine because the government under Bolsonaro just isn't doing it. So it's kind of funny to me how criminal gangs show a greater respect for human life than the government does, and that is just mind-blowing to me. That just shows how little the government of Brazil, the government under Bolsonaro, actually cares about this. It's quite staggering. So let's go to Sweden. In Sweden right now, we have 3,447 confirmed cases so far. So we have 105 dead. So let's divide that. Yeah, Sweden is, you know, not doing too well. Not too badly either, but they're not doing too well. So the death rate so far in Sweden is about 3%. So about 3%. Yeah, that's not good. That's not good. And looking at the curve here, it's still increasing exponentially. Yeah, this is not gonna end good. This is gonna end badly. And the worst part is, Sweden doesn't really have an excuse. Sweden doesn't have that many tourists in the winter. So Sweden can't use that as an excuse. And most of the elderly live in homes where they are supposed to be, you know, secluded. So that's not an excuse. And Swedes are definitely not very sociable people. How do I know that? Well, because I currently live in Sweden. I currently reside in Sweden. I live among the Swedes. And I can tell you from experience, Swedes are not very social. You know, if you start to talk to a stranger on the bus, it's not like in Spain or in Italy where, you know, that's normal. If you start talking to a stranger on the bus in Sweden, you know, people think you're a fucking freak. You know, they think, they wonder, like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Why do you talk to me? Get away. Are you a creep? Like, you know, people just don't do that. So there is no excuse here. Sweden should be doing far better than they are. But the truth is, the Swedish healthcare system, even though it's still without a doubt better than the US one, it's been underfunded, understaffed, and neglected by the government. It has. So Sweden has a healthcare system that's universal, which is good. But the problem is that both right-wing and left-wing governments alike, and again, I'm not trying to put, politics into this, of course, but I'm just saying that, when you look at, what led to the state that the healthcare system is in, you have to look at these things. But the point is, both types of government, it doesn't matter which one it is, both types have underfunded the healthcare system. They've understaffed the healthcare system. There is a shortage of nurses. There's a shortage of doctors in Sweden, and there has been for about 10 years now. There's nothing wrong with the healthcare system itself. The universal healthcare system of Sweden is just fine. The problem is political, okay? The problem is that there's just not enough money being pumped into the healthcare system, which, Sweden has a very good standard of living. Sweden has a very high income per capita compared to a lot of nations. There is no excuse. Sweden should be doing far better than it is. And I know that in Sweden, actually, there was a big news story a few weeks ago where the union of nurses and doctors, I think, had to manufacture visors. They had to improvise and manufacture visors for doctors and nurses in the healthcare industry, because the government just wasn't able to supply that. And Sweden, again, not a lot of tourists. The elderly are secluded from the rest of society, and people are not densely populated at all, and they're already very unsocial. Sweden should, by all standards, do well. There should hardly be any deaths right now in Sweden. But the fact that the death rate so far is a little bit above, the first estimation of the death rate by the CDC and the World Health Organization, it only goes to show what happens if you don't fund your healthcare system for a decade and if you don't staff it. Because, there's been a problem for, over 10 years now in Sweden where a lot of people, they don't want to be nurses and doctors because it's a very stressful occupation. The stress is very high, and there's a lot of complaints by these people. There's nothing wrong with the pay, really. I mean, nurses in Sweden get paid very well, and so do the doctors. If you're a doctor in Sweden, you're paid very well. So the pay is good. It's just the complaints from doctors and nurses. The reason they're saying that it's underfunded is not because they don't get paid enough. It's that the hospitals just can't afford, the equipment they need to treat people. And of course, that's being exposed even more now during this crisis. And another reason why Sweden is doing very poorly, it's entirely due to the government. So not only is the healthcare system in Sweden, there's nothing wrong with the healthcare system itself, okay? But like I said, it's underfunded, it's understaffed, and it has been for over a decade at least. But another problem is the government has not put, Sweden under any quarantine. In fact, the Prime Minister of Sweden said over a week ago that, in order to, help with preventing an economic crisis in Sweden, everyone should go to their local restaurant and eat. Which is just, are you fucking kidding me? What the fuck, man? Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? You are the Prime Minister of Sweden. You should be taking this seriously, You should be telling your population, okay, do social distancing, okay? Even better, you should put people under quarantine. And yeah, you know what? There's going to be an economic, consequence to this. But isn't people's lives worth more than an economic crisis? But no. Instead of putting the nation under a quarantine and basically paying people, 80% of their salary, like the UK government is doing, just to make sure that people really do stay at home. Instead of doing that, no, the Swedish government is doing practically nothing. They have gone out and said, oh, you should practice social distancing and wash your hands. And yeah, but let me just put it this way. The schools in Sweden are still open, okay? The schools in Sweden are still open. Think about that. In most other nations right now, the schools are closed. Because, kids, they don't tend to think about hygiene as much as adults. And they're close to each other in schools. And even though kids don't seem to be that badly affected by this virus for the most part, they do carry it. And then they infect, their family members. So the schools should definitely be closed right now. And I mean, keep in mind, I'm saying this. I work as a substitute teacher. Okay, so I study full time at the university, chemistry, but I also, to support myself, I work part time as a substitute teacher. And if I wanted to, I could work right now. But I choose not to because I'm not irresponsible. I refuse to partake in a system that unnecessarily puts people's lives in danger. So I've made the conscious decision that for last week I have not been working, and I'm not going to work. I refuse. I'm not going to put myself up as available so I can be booked because, I refuse to go to work right now. I refuse to participate in a system where the schools are still open because the government cares more about avoiding an economic collapse than caring about its citizens. That's how bad this is, and I refuse to participate. I say fuck that, and fuck this government. You should be closing down everything right now. And it's only going to get worse and worse because the curve is going up and it's increasing exponentially. And just a week ago, we only had like 20 deaths. Now we have over 100. And this number is just going to keep going up and up and up and up and up and up and up. It's bad. It's bad. And you can tell it's going to be bad because the total deaths are... what is it? It's like 7 times higher than the total recovered, roundabout. So you have 7 times more deaths right now than the amount of people who are officially recovered. That's how you can tell that this is going to be bad. So yeah, I mean, I could go to work right now and I could be making money, but I refuse. Not going to happen. And I mean, eventually the schools are going to close here. They have to. I don't see how they can possibly keep the schools open here. At some point, they're going to have to close the schools. But I don't know when. But it's going to have to be soon. And then they're going to be closed for at least 2 weeks, I'm guessing. It should be longer. It really should. But I'm guessing that for the next month, I'm not going to be able to make a living, which is not good in my situation. And that is why I would appreciate it if you were to support me on Patreon. And if enough people support me, I can make more videos like the one I did on COVID-19, which I uploaded 2 days ago. Or, videos like the one where I expose Greta Thunberg, while also explaining that even though Greta Thunberg is a fraud, climate change is not a fraud. It's definitely not. Yeah, I know you guys enjoy those videos, but you gotta understand, it takes a lot of time and effort to make those videos. But I could make a video like that every single week. I mean, think about it. A documentary level video every single week. It could happen. I just need enough of you to support me, and that can happen. And like I said, right now, I could really use your support. But so yeah, that's this video. I know it's not a highly processed and edited video like the one I did previously. And I was supposed to basically have this segment part of that video, but that video was already 55 minutes long, and I thought, screw it. I'm just going to make this a a separate video. And I might as well make it on the spot like this to save time and just get it up quicker. Because, look, people need this info, and I'm not kidding. Like, it may sound dramatic when I say this, but watching these videos made by people who know about this stuff. I mean, look, I'm a chemist, okay? I'm a chemist. And I have read biochemistry. I didn't get a degree in it, but I have read it. So I do understand the basics of virology. I do understand how viruses, how they infect and reproduce. And I do know enough about this topic where I could save someone's life if they were to listen to me. But more importantly, listen to, qualified experts, because, as much as I know about this, I still don't know nearly as much as an actual virologist does. And I'm trying to sort of be the middleman here. I'm trying to sort of bridge the gap between the qualified personnel, the authority on this subject, and the common people who frankly don't know enough about this. I'm trying to be sort of the bridge here between these camps. And so I'm trying to take the info that the authorities give to you, and I'm trying to process it and make it understandable for you. Yeah, it might sound, I don't know, might sound like I have my head up my ass, but it is fundamentally true. It is what it is. I don't know what to tell you. But yeah, if you enjoy what I'm doing here, or if you want to promote it because you think it's a social good, then yeah, you can support me on Patreon. But look, even if you don't want to support me on Patreon, that's fine. You can also follow me on social media, especially my Twitter. Twitter is the website I use the most often. I do have a Facebook, and I do have a Minds page, but I haven't logged into my Minds for like a year now, I think. And my Facebook, I update very rarely there. If you want to be up to date, I suggest you follow me on Twitter. That's the best social media place to follow me, to be honest. And of course, like, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to click that bell and make it to, and set it to always notify. Otherwise, you're just not going to get notified. YouTube is horrible when it comes to this. I might make more videos on this topic, and it is info that can really be useful for people. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!